tragic tapestry of Lucrezia Borgia, a pawn in a Renaissance game of sin. In the gilded shadows of Renaissance Italy, where the sacred and the profane waltzed in a macabre embrace, a young girl's life was woven into a tapestry of ambition, betrayal, and unspeakable corruption. Lucrezia Borgia, born in 1480, entered a world where the Vatican, the supposed heart of Christendom, pulsed with vice, and her own father, a cardinal destined to wear the papal tiara, orchestrated her descent into a living nightmare. This was no fairy tale of princesses and knights, but a grim saga of a daughter molded into a pawn, her innocence sacrificed on the altar of power by the very hands that should have protected her. Her name, whispered through centuries, conjures images of poison, seduction, and incest. Yet the truth of Lucrezia's story is far darker and more human than the legends that cling to her like a shroud. What happens when the man meant to embody divine virtue becomes the architect of his daughter's ruin? The answer lies in a tale that unveils the grotesque underbelly of the Renaissance, where beauty masked brutality and love was twisted into possession. Rome in the late 15th century was a city of contradictions, a glittering stage where the divine and the diabolical collided. The Renaissance, celebrated for its artistic splendor and intellectual rebirth, harbored a festering core of moral decay. The Vatican, far from being a beacon of holiness, had become a den of iniquity, where cardinals traded sacred offices for gold, hosted orgies in papal chambers, and plotted murders with the same zeal they offered prayers. At the heart of this cesspool stood the Borgia family, led by Rodrigo Borgia, a man whose ambition knew no bounds and whose appetites defied decency. As Cardinal Borgia, he amassed wealth and influence, siring illegitimate children with his mistress Vanozza de Catane, among them Lucrezia, a golden-haired girl whose beauty would become both her curse and her weapon. Unlike other bastards of the era, hidden away in shame, Lucrezia was thrust into the spotlight, groomed from infancy to serve as a bargaining chip in her father's relentless quest for power. Her childhood was no idyll of innocence, but a masterclass in survival, taught in a court where poison flowed as freely as wine, and assassins lurked in every shadow. Rodrigo's ascension to the papacy in 1492, as Pope Alexander VI, marked a turning point not only for the Borgias, but for Lucrezia, then just 12 years old. His election was no divine mandate, but a transaction, secured through bribes so blatant they shocked even a jaded Rome. Gold, promises, and threats bought him the triple crown, transforming him into the most powerful man in Christendom and the most debauched. The papal court under Alexander VI became a theater of excess, where morality was a currency no one valued. Chronicles of the time, penned by horrified observers like Johann Burchard, the papal master of ceremonies, describe scenes that defy belief. Banquets where courtesans danced naked, collecting chestnuts for the amusement of the Pope and his entourage, cardinals openly keeping mistresses, and murders orchestrated with chilling precision. This was the world into which Lucrezia was thrust, a child forced to navigate a labyrinth of predators, her every step dictated by her father's insatiable hunger for control. Lucrezia's beauty, described by contemporaries as ethereal, with cascading golden hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets beyond her years, made her a prize in the Borgia arsenal. From the age of 10, she was betrothed not once but twice, each engagement a cold calculation to secure alliances for her father. These were not the romantic dreams of a young girl, but contracts sealed in the smoky chambers of the Vatican, where her body and future were bartered like commodities. By 13, she was married to Giovanni Sforza, a union less about love than about cementing a political merger. The wedding, held in the Vatican itself, was a spectacle of power, with Lucrezia, barely more than a child, dressed in finery that belied the grim reality of her role. Whispers of her father's unnatural interest in her marriage, bed-demanding detailed accounts of its consummation, cast a sinister shadow over the ceremony, hinting at a perversion that would fuel centuries of scandal. Whether these whispers were truth or malice, they took root in a Rome where the Borgias' crimes made even the most outlandish accusations plausible. The accusations of incest, or particularly with her father and her brother Cesare, would haunt Lucrezia's legacy, painting her as a femme fatale in a narrative she did not write. Cesare Borgia, her elder brother, was a figure as charismatic as he was terrifying, a brilliant strategist whose charm masked a ruthless core. Handsome and ambitious, he was his father's enforcer, carving a bloody path through Italy to secure the Borgia dynasty. Yet his relationship with Lucrezia was shrouded in dark rumors, fueled by his possessive violence and jealousy toward any man who dared approach her. These whispers were amplified by the annulment of her first marriage, a humiliating ordeal orchestrated by her father. To dissolve the union with Sforza, Alexander declared it unconsummated, forcing Lucrezia to undergo a public examination to prove her virginity, a degrading spectacle that stripped her of dignity and turned her private life into a political weapon. Sforza's retaliatory claim that the Borgias sought to end the marriage to continue their incestuous hold over Lucrezia only deepened the scandal, whether born of spite or fragments of truth. This introduction merely scratches the surface of Lucrezia's tragedy, a life shaped by forces she could not control. Her story is not one of poison and seduction, as legend would have it, but of a young woman caught in a web spun by those meant to protect her. Her father, cloaked in the sanctity of the papacy, used her as a tool to forge alliances and amass power. Her brother, driven by a volatile mix of ambition and obsession, cast a shadow over her every attempt at independence. Through forced marriages, public humiliation, and the murder of those she loved, Lucrezia was stripped of agency, her humanity reduced to a means to an end. Yet within this crucible of corruption, she would find ways to assert her intelligence and resilience, transforming from a pawn into a player in a game rigged against her. The Renaissance, with its dazzling art and brutal politics, was her stage, and her life a testament to the cost of power and the strength it takes to survive its grasp. As we unravel the threads of Lucrezia Borgia's story, we confront not only the horrors of her world, but the enduring question of how a woman, denied her voice, can still leave an indelible mark on history. A childhood stolen, Lucrezia Borgia as a pawn in a corrupt court. The gilded shadows of Renaissance Italy, painted so vividly in the opulent yet sinister world of the Vatican, cast a long and suffocating darkness over Lucrezia Borgia's early years. As we saw in the opening of her tragic tale, Rome in the late 15th century was a city where holiness was a mask worn loosely, where the sacred halls of the papacy echoed with whispers of debauchery, betrayal, and murder. At the heart of this moral abyss stood the Borgia family, led by Rodrigo Borgia, a man whose ambition transformed the papacy into a tool for personal gain. Lucrezia, born in 1480 as his illegitimate daughter, was no ordinary child. She was a carefully crafted instrument in her father's relentless pursuit of power. Far from the innocence of childhood, her earliest years were a masterclass in manipulation, where she learned not to play or dream, but to survive in a court where trust was a luxury and betrayal a currency. This chapter delves into the harrowing details of Lucrezia's childhood, tracing how a girl of radiant beauty and latent intelligence was molded into a pawn, her life dictated by the sinister machinations of a father who would become the most notorious pope in history. From the moment of her birth, Lucrezia's existence was marked by the stain of illegitimacy, a fact that in another family might have consigned her to obscurity. Born to Rodrigo Borgia and his mistress Vanozza de Catane, a woman of modest origins yet sharp cunning, Lucrezia was one of several children sired outside the bounds of marriage. In the rigid hierarchy of Renaissance society, bastards were typically hidden away, their existence a quiet shame. But Rodrigo, a cardinal with an insatiable appetite for power, saw in his daughter not a burden, but an opportunity. Unlike her siblings, who were also pawns in varying degrees, Lucrezia's beauty described by contemporaries as ethereal, with golden hair that shimmered like sunlight and eyes that held a quiet, searching intelligence, set her apart. From her earliest years, she was groomed not for a life of piety or learning, as befitted a noblewoman, but for a role far more calculated, to serve as a living treaty, a breathing alliance in the Borgia family's climb to dominance. Her childhood home was not a sanctuary of warmth, but a gilded cage, where every lesson was steeped in the art of survival among predators. The Rome of Lucrezia's youth was a city where danger lurked in every shadow. The Vatican, far from being a bastion of spiritual guidance, had become a marketplace of vice. Cardinals openly kept mistresses, church offices were sold to the highest bidder, and poison was as common a tool as prayer. Chronicles from the time, such as those of Johann Burchard, paint a picture of a papal court that rivaled the decadence of ancient Rome. The infamous Banquet of Chestnuts, where courtesans crawled naked across the floor of the papal palace to amuse the pope and his entourage, was but one of many spectacles that defined the era. Lucrezia, barely old enough to understand the world around her, was thrust into this den of iniquity, her presence a constant reminder of her father's audacity in flaunting his illegitimate offspring. While other children learned nursery rhymes, Lucrezia was taught to navigate a world where a smile could conceal a dagger and a gift could hide poison. Her education, overseen by tutors loyal to Rodrigo, focused not on scripture or embroidery, but on the subtleties of courtly intrigue, how to charm, how to observe, how to conceal her true thoughts behind a facade of grace. By the age of 10, Lucrezia's life was already being shaped by the cold calculus of politics. In 1490, Rodrigo arranged her first betrothal to a Spanish nobleman, a match designed to secure an alliance with a powerful family. The agreement was dissolved when political winds shifted, only for Lucrezia to be promised to another suitor shortly after. These were not the romantic fantasies of a young girl, but transactions negotiated in smoky Vatican chambers, where her value was measured in terms of land, titles, and influence. The betrothals, conducted when she was still a child, stripped her of agency before she could even grasp its meaning. Contemporary accounts describe her as a quiet, observant girl, her beauty already drawing attention, but her eyes betraying a wariness beyond her years. She learned early that her body and name were commodities, to be traded for the benefit of the Borgia dynasty. The weight of this realization must have been crushing, yet Lucrezia's resilience began to show even then, as she adapted to the role forced upon her. Rodrigo's ambition reached its zenith in 1492 when, through a campaign of bribery so blatant it shocked even the jaded cardinals of the conclave, he secured the papacy as Pope Alexander VI. The transformation of Cardinal Borgia into the Vicar of Christ was no divine anointment, but a triumph of cunning and corruption. He offered vast sums, promised lucrative positions, and leveraged his network of allies to buy the votes needed to claim the Triple Crown. For Lucrezia, now 12, her father's ascension marked the beginning of a new and more perilous chapter. The papal court, already a cesspool of vice, became a stage for Alexander's unchecked appetites for power, wealth, and pleasure. His children, particularly Lucrezia and her brother Cesare, were elevated to the forefront of his schemes, their lives intertwined with his vision of a Borgia dynasty that would rival the great houses of Europe. But this elevation came at a cost, as Lucrezia was thrust deeper into the web of her father's manipulations. At 13, Lucrezia was married to Giovanni Sforza, a minor noble from the powerful Sforza family of Milan. The wedding, held in the Vatican itself, was a spectacle of political theater, with Lucrezia adorned in silks and jewels that belied the grim reality of her role. The ceremony was less a celebration of love than a sealing of an alliance, designed to bolster the Borgia's influence in northern Italy. Contemporary accounts describe Lucrezia as a vision of beauty, her golden hair cascading in waves, her demeanor poised yet distant. But behind the facade, she was a child navigating a world of adult treachery. Whispers circulated of Alexander's unsettling interest in the marriage's consummation, with some sources claiming he demanded detailed reports of the couple's intimate moments. Whether these accounts were true or the product of malicious gossip, they reflect the toxic atmosphere of the Borgia court, where even the most private aspects of Lucrezia's life were subject to scrutiny and control. The marriage to Sforza was doomed from the start, not by personal failings but by shifting political tides. When the alliance with Milan became inconvenient, Alexander moved to dissolve the union, declaring it unconsummated despite 3 years of cohabitation. To prove this claim, Lucretia was subjected to a humiliating examination by midwives, who attested to her virginity in a public spectacle that turned her body into a matter of political record. The ordeal was a stark reminder of her status as property, her dignity sacrificed to her father's ambitions. Sforza, enraged by the annulment, retaliated with accusations that would echo through history. He claimed the Borgias sought to end the marriage to Yahoo system, continue their incestuous relationship with Lucretia without interference. These accusations, whether born of truth or spite, found fertile ground in the scandal-saturated air of Renaissance Rome, where the Borgia's reputation made even the wildest rumors believable. Cesare Borgia, Lucrezia's elder brother, emerged as a figure both charismatic and terrifying, his shadow looming large over her life. Described as handsome, brilliant, and utterly ruthless, Cesare was the enforcer of the Borgia ambitions, a man whose charm masked a capacity for violence that chilled even his allies. His relationship with Lucrezia was complex, marked by a possessive intensity that fueled the darkest rumors. Servants whispered of midnight summons to the papal apartments, of Cesare's violent jealousy toward any man who approached his sister. While the incest allegations remain unproven, the psychological hold Cesare exerted over Lucrezia was undeniable, a blend of protection and domination that left her caught between fear and dependence. The annulment of her marriage to Sforza in 1497 marked a turning point, plunging Lucrezia deeper into the Borgia web. At 17, she was married again, this time to Alfonso of Aragon, a union that offered a fleeting glimpse of happiness. Contemporary accounts suggest Lucrezia felt genuine affection for Alfonso, and the birth of their son Rodrigo hinted at a life that might have been. But the Borgia's enemies were many, and happiness was a luxury they could not afford. Cesare, driven by a mix of political ambition and personal obsession, saw Alfonso as a threat to his control over Lucrezia. In 1500, Alfonso was attacked on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica, surviving only to be strangled in his sickbed by Cesare's henchmen as Lucrezia desperately tried to protect him. The official cause of death was listed as fever, but the truth was an open secret in Rome. Lucrezia's world shattered with Alfonso's murder. Witnesses described her as a hollow-eyed specter, the vivacious girl replaced by a woman who understood her role as a possession. The psychological toll of watching her brother murder her husband, with her father's implicit approval, marked the death of whatever innocence remained. Yet even in this crucible of betrayal, Lucrezia's resilience began to emerge. Her next marriage to Alfonso d'Este of Ferrara would offer a chance to escape the Borgia shadow, but the scars of her childhood, forged in a court where love was a transaction and trust a trap, would never fully heal. This chapter of Lucrezia's life reveals the true cost of her father's ambition and her brother's obsession. She was not merely a victim, but a survivor, forced to navigate a world where her beauty and intelligence were both her greatest assets and her heaviest burdens. As we move forward in her story, we will see how Lucrezia, against all odds, began to carve out a space for herself, transforming from a pawn into a player in the deadly game of Renaissance politics. Her childhood, stolen by the very family meant to protect her, set the stage for a life of extraordinary resilience and heartbreaking tragedy. The papal throne and a daughter's descent, Lucrezia Borgia, in the grip of Alexander VI's reign. The gilded cage of Lucrezia Borgia's childhood, as we explored in the shadowed halls of Renaissance Rome, was a crucible where innocence was forged into survival. Born into a world where the Vatican's sanctity was a hollow facade, Lucrezia learned early that her beauty and name were tools in her father's relentless quest for power. By the age of 12, as Rodrigo Borgia ascended to the papacy as Alexander VI in 1492, her life took a darker turn. The annulment of her first marriage and the brutal murder of her second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, at the hands of her brother Cesare, left Lucrezia a hollowed figure, her spirit battered by the machinations of a family that treated her as property. Yet the story of Lucrezia is not merely one of victimhood, but of resilience, as she navigated the treacherous waters of a court where love was a transaction and loyalty a lie. This chapter delves into the pivotal years of Alexander II's papacy, a time when Lucrezia, now a young woman, was thrust deeper into the Borgia web, her life shaped by her father's corrupt reign and her brother's possessive violence, even as she began to glimpse paths to agency within her constraints. Rodrigo Borgia's transformation into Pope Alexander VI was a masterstroke of ambition, secured through bribes that scandalized even the jaded cardinals of the conclave. As we saw, his ascension in 1492 was no divine mandate, but a transaction, with gold and promises flowing freely to secure the papal tiara. For Lucrezia, this marked the moment when her father's power reached its zenith, and her own life became a chessboard for his grand designs. Alexander VI was no ordinary pope. He was a man who saw the papacy as a tool to enrich his family and cement a Borgia dynasty that would rival Europe's greatest houses. His court became a theater of excess, where orgies replaced vespers and murder was as routine as prayer. Chronicles from the time, such as those of Johann Burchard, describe scenes of unimaginable debauchery. Banquets where courtesans performed for the Pope's amusement, cardinalships sold to the highest bidder, and poison administered with a smile. This was the world Lucrezia inhabited, a place where the sacred was profaned daily, and her role as the Pope's daughter made her both a prize and a target. At 13, Lucrezia's first marriage to Giovanni Sforza, as detailed earlier, was a political maneuver, a union designed to bind the Borgias to the powerful Sforza family of Milan. The marriage's dissolution in 1497, when Lucrezia was just 17, was a public humiliation orchestrated by her father. Declaring the marriage unconsummated, Alexander forced Lucrezia to endure a degrading examination to prove her virginity, a spectacle that turned her private life into a matter of political record. Sforza's retaliatory accusations of incest claiming the Borgias sought to keep Lucrezia for themselves, ignited rumors that would cling to her name for centuries. Whether these claims were born of truth or vengeance, they thrived in the fetid atmosphere of Rome, where the Borgias' documented crimes made even the most lurid gossip plausible. For Lucrezia, the annulment was more than a personal betrayal. It was a stark lesson in her expendability, a reminder that her body and future were tools to be wielded by her father's hand. The aftermath of the Sforza marriage left Lucrezia reeling, her trust in her family eroded by the public shaming and the whispers that followed her. Yet her father wasted no time in arranging her next move on the political chessboard. In 1498, at the age of 18, Lucrezia was married to Alfonso of Aragon, the illegitimate son of the King of Naples. This union, unlike her first, offered a glimmer of hope. Contemporary accounts suggest Lucrezia felt genuine affection for Alfonso, a handsome and kind-hearted young man who seemed to offer an escape from the Borgia darkness. Their marriage produced a son, Rodrigo, named after her father, and for a brief moment, Lucrezia dared to imagine a life untainted by her family's corruption. She was described by observers as radiant during this period, her golden hair and serene demeanor masking the scars of her past. But in the Borgia world, happiness was a dangerous indulgence, and Lucrezia's affection for Alfonso made him a target. Cesare Borgia, Lucrezia's elder brother, was a figure whose brilliance was matched only by his ruthlessness. As we saw, his possessive hold over Lucrezia was a source of dark rumors, fueled by his violent jealousy and the Borgia's reputation for excess. Cesare, now a cardinal but soon to abandon the cloth for a sword, was Alexander's enforcer, carving out a bloody empire in the Romagna with papal backing. His obsession with Lucrezia, whether fraternal or unnatural, cast a shadow over her second marriage. Alfonso's presence threatened Cesare's control, and the Borgias' shifting alliances made Naples a liability. In July 1500, the fragile peace of Lucrezia's life was shattered when Alfonso was attacked on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica. Stabbed and left for dead, he clung to life, nursed by Lucrezia, who prepared his meals herself to guard against poison, a chilling reflection of the paranoia that defined her world. Her efforts were in vain. Cesare, allegedly declaring that what was not done at lunch will be done at dinner, entered Alfonso's sick room with his henchmen. Lucrezia and her sister-in-law were forcibly removed, and Alfonso was strangled in his bed. The official report cited fever, but Rome knew the truth. Cesare, with Alexander's tacit approval, had eliminated a rival for Lucrezia's loyalty. The murder of Alfonso was a turning point for Lucrezia, shattering whatever illusions remained about her family's love. Witnesses described her as transformed, her once vivacious spirit replaced by a haunted silence. The loss of Alfonso, whom she had loved, and the betrayal by her brother and father, who orchestrated his death, left her grappling with a grief she could not openly express. The psychological toll was immense, yet it was compounded by new rumors that swirled around her. Servants whispered of midnight visits to the papal apartments, of a mysterious child, the infans Romanus, whose parentage was shrouded in confusion. Papal bulls issued contradictory claims, some naming Cesare as the father, others hinting at Alexander, while carefully avoiding the question of the mother. These allegations, whether true or fabricated by enemies, deepened Lucrezia's isolation, painting her as complicit in her family's sins. In truth, she was a prisoner, her every move dictated by the men who claimed to protect her. Alexander VI's reign was not merely a backdrop, but an active force in Lucrezia's descent. His ambition knew no bounds, and his children were his instruments. While Cesare waged war to expand Borgia influence, Lucrezia was deployed as a diplomatic tool, her marriages forging and breaking alliances as needed. The Pope's personal appetites added another layer of horror to her life. Contemporary accounts, though disputed, suggest he took an unhealthy interest in Lucrezia's private affairs, demanding oversight of her marriages that bordered on obsession. Whether these accounts were exaggerated or not, they reflect the toxic dynamic of a family where natural affections were perverted by power. Alexander's love for Lucrezia was not paternal, but possessive, viewing her as an extension of his own ambitions rather than a person with her own desires. Lucrezia's response to these traumas was a complex blend of submission and adaptation. At 18, she was already a seasoned survivor, learning to mask her pain behind a facade of grace. Her intelligence, noted by those who met her, became a tool for navigating the Borgia court. She mastered the art of diplomacy, charming allies while concealing her distrust of her own family. Yet the cost of this survival was steep. Each betrayal, Sforza's accusations, Alfonso's murder, the rumors of incest chipped away at her sense of self, leaving her to question whether she could ever escape the Borgia taint. Her beauty, once a source of pride, became a liability, drawing the attention of men like her father and brother, who saw it as a weapon to be wielded, and enemies who used it to paint her as a seductress. The murder of Alfonso marked the nadir of Lucrezia's youth, but it also set the stage for her next chapter. In 1501, at 21, she was married to Alfonso d'Este, heir to the Duchy of Ferrara. This marriage, unlike the others, offered a chance to escape the immediate grasp of her family. Ferrara was far from Rome, and the d'Este family, though initially wary of the Borgia reputation, provided Lucrezia with a new arena to prove herself. As we will see, this move would allow her to forge a new identity, not as a pawn, but as a patron and ruler in her own right. Yet the scars of her father's reign, his corruption, his betrayal, and the blood spilled in his name would follow her, shaping her resilience and her resolve. Lucrezia's story during Alexander Think's papacy is one of survival against overwhelming odds. Caught between a father who saw her as a tool and a brother who viewed her as a possession, she endured humiliations and losses that would have broken a lesser spirit. Her ability to adapt, to find slivers of agency within her constraints, speaks to a strength that history has often overlooked. As we move to her years in Ferrara, we will witness how Lucrezia, forged in the fires of her father's corrupt reign, began to redefine herself, transforming from a victim of the Borgia legacy into a woman who would leave her own mark on the Renaissance. Cesare's shadow in a sister struggle, Lucrezia Borgia's descent into darkness. The reign of Pope Alexander VI, as we explored in the previous chapter, cast a suffocating shadow over Lucrezia Borgia's life, transforming her from a radiant child into a young woman scarred by betrayal and loss. The annulment of her first marriage to Giovanni Sforza and the brutal murder of her second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, at the hands of her brother Cesare, marked her as a pawn in the Borgia family's ruthless game of power. By 1500, at the age of 20, Lucrezia had endured public humiliation, whispered accusations of incest, and the violent death of a husband she loved, all orchestrated by the men who should have protected her. Her father, the corrupt pontiff, and her brother, a charismatic yet terrifying enforcer, had reduced her to a tool for their ambitions, her beauty and intelligence wielded as weapons in their quest for dominance. Yet even in this crucible of despair, Lucrezia's resilience began to glimmer, hinting at a strength that would define her next chapter. This section delves into the years dominated by Cesare Borgia's rising power and Lucrezia's struggle to survive his possessive grip, as she navigated the darkest moments of her life before finding a path toward reinvention in Ferrara. Cesare Borgia, Lucrezia's elder brother, was a figure whose brilliance was matched only by his cruelty. As we saw, his role as the Pope's enforcer made him a force of terror across Italy. His ambition to carve out a Borgia empire in the Romagna, backed by papal gold and steel. Described by contemporaries as strikingly handsome, with a sharp mind and a charm that disarmed even his enemies, Cesare was a paradox of man who could inspire loyalty in one moment and dread in the next. His relationship with Lucrezia was the subject of Rome's darkest gossip, fueled by his intense, almost obsessive protectiveness. Whether these rumors of incest held any truth or were the venom of Borgia enemies, they thrived in a city where the family's documented crimes, murder, bribery, and debauchery made the unthinkable seem plausible. For Lucrezia, Cesare was both a shield and a chain, a brother who offered protection in a treacherous world but demanded absolute loyalty in return, his jealousy a constant threat to her fragile attempts at independence. The murder of Alfonso of Aragon in 1500, as detailed earlier, was a devastating blow that laid bare Cesare's hold over Lucrezia's life. Alfonso, her second husband, had been a rare source of light in her shadowed existence. Their brief marriage, marked by genuine affection and the birth of their son, Rodrigo, offered Lucrezia a glimpse of a life free from her family's corruption. But Cesare, driven by a volatile mix of political calculation and personal obsession, saw Alfonso as a rival for his sister's allegiance. The attack on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica left Alfonso clinging to life, and Lucrezia's desperate efforts to save him, preparing his meals to prevent poisoning, standing guard by his bedside, revealed her fierce determination to protect what little happiness she had found. Cesare's chilling words, reportedly declaring that what was not done at lunch will be done at dinner, underscored his relentless resolve. When he and his henchmen entered Alfonso's sick room, forcibly removing Lucrezia and her sister-in-law, the strangling of her husband marked the end of her illusions. The official cause of death was listed as fever, but Rome's whispers told a different story. Cesare, with Alexander's implicit approval, had eliminated a threat to the Borgia dynasty. The psychological impact of Alfonso's murder was profound, stripping Lucrezia of the last vestiges of her youth. Witnesses described her as a ghost of her former self, her once vibrant eyes dulled by grief and betrayal. The loss was not just personal but existential, forcing her to confront the reality that her family saw her not as a person but as a possession to be controlled. The rumors that followed only deepened her isolation. Servants spoke of clandestine meetings in the papal apartments, of Cesare's violent outbursts toward any man who showed interest in his sister. The mysterious infans Romanus, a child whose parentage was shrouded in ambiguity, became a focal point of scandal. Papal bulls issued contradictory claims, some naming Cesare as the father, others pointing to Alexander, while carefully avoiding the question of the mother. These allegations, whether true or fabricated by enemies like the Sforza or Orsini families, painted Lucrezia as complicit in her family's sins, a seductress rather than a victim. In truth, she was a prisoner, her every move dictated by the men who claimed to love her voice silenced by their power. Cesare's influence over Lucrezia extended beyond personal dynamics to the political sphere, where he wielded her as a tool in his conquests. As he marched through the Romagna, seizing cities with a mix of diplomacy and brutality, Lucrezia was a key asset in his father's diplomatic arsenal. Alexander VI, ever the strategist, used his daughter's marriages to forge and break alliances, each one a calculated move to strengthen the Borgia grip on Italy. After Alfonso's death, Lucrezia was briefly sent to the castle of Nepi, a move framed as a retreat but likely a means to keep her under control while her father negotiated her next marriage. Isolated and grieving, she was left to grapple with the weight of her family's crimes, her role in their schemes a constant reminder of her lack of agency. Yet even in this dark period, Lucrezia's intelligence and adaptability began to surface. She corresponded with allies, maintained a poised exterior, and learned to navigate the treacherous politics of the Borgia court, skills that would prove vital in her next chapter. In 1501, at the age of 21, Lucrezia was married to Alfonso d'Este, heir to the Duchy of Ferrara. This marriage, unlike her previous ones, was a strategic triumph for the Borgias, aligning them with one of Italy's most prestigious families. The negotiations were fraught, as the d'Este family recoiled at the Borgia reputation, with its taint of scandal and bloodshed. Lucrezia, aware of her role as a bargaining chip, participated in the discussions with a cold efficiency that belied her youth. She demanded guarantees of position and security, a dowry that would ensure her influence, and terms that would grant her a degree of autonomy. This marked a shift in her character, from a passive pawn to a woman who understood the rules of the game and was determined to play it to her advantage. The wedding, held in Ferrara in early 1502, was a lavish affair, a stark contrast to the grim realities of her past. Lucrezia, dressed in silks that shimmered under the torchlight, was described as a vision of grace, her beauty masking the scars of her losses. Ferrara offered Lucrezia something she had never known: distance from the Borgia court. While Cesare continued his bloody campaigns and Alexander's scheme from Rome, Lucrezia found herself in a new world, one where she could begin to redefine herself. The D'Este court, though initially wary of her, was a hub of culture and intellect, and Lucrezia seized the opportunity to prove her worth. She surrounded herself with poets, artists, and scholars, becoming a patron of the arts in her own right. Her correspondence with figures like Pietro Bembo, a leading humanist of the era, revealed a woman of surprising depth, capable of engaging in discussions of poetry, philosophy, and statecraft. She governed Ferrara during her husband's absences, managing its finances and defenses with a competence that silenced those who had dismissed her as a mere Borgia pawn. This transformation was not without cost, however. Her numerous pregnancies, at least 11, many ending in miscarriage or stillbirth, took a physical toll. Each loss a reminder of how her body had been commodified from childhood. Cesare's shadow, though distant, never fully receded. His campaigns in the Romagna, while initially successful, made enemies who would outlast the Borgia dynasty. His jealousy and need for control persisted, with letters from Rome hinting at his displeasure at Lucrezia's growing independence. The rumors of their relationship continued to haunt her, even in Ferrara, where courtiers whispered about the infans Romanus and her ties to the Borgia scandals. Yet Lucrezia's resilience shone through. She cultivated alliances, built a reputation as a capable ruler, and began to forge an identity separate from her family's infamy. Her marriage to Alfonso d'Este, initially a political arrangement, evolved into a partnership of mutual respect. Unlike her previous husbands, Alfonso came to value her intelligence, relying on her counsel in matters of state. Their children, including Ercole and Ippolito, became her focus, a chance to create a legacy untainted by the Borgia name. The death of Alexander's 66 in 1503, possibly by poison, though officially attributed to fever, marked a turning point. Lucrezia's reaction was telling: no tears, no public grief, only a pragmatic assessment of her position. The loss of her father, who had both given her life and stolen her freedom, brought relief tinged with caution. Cesare's downfall followed swiftly. Without papal protection, his enemies closed in, and he was imprisoned, escaped, and ultimately died in a minor skirmish in Spain in 1507. Lucrezia's response was muted, though she wore mourning clothes longer than custom demanded, a gesture that puzzled observers. Was it grief for the brother who had tormented her, or a calculated performance to maintain appearances? The answer remains one of history's mysteries, but it underscores the complexity of her emotions, shaped by years of surviving in a family where love and control were indistinguishable. Lucrezia's years under Cesare's shadow were the darkest of her life, a period defined by loss, betrayal, and the constant threat of her brother's possessiveness. Yet they also laid the foundation for her reinvention in Ferrara, where she would emerge not as a victim, but as a ruler and patron of the arts. As we move to the next chapter, we will explore how Lucrezia, freed from the immediate grasp of her family, transformed herself into a figure of power and grace, even as the scars of her past continued to shape her destiny. A new dawn in Ferrara. Lucrezia Borgia's redemption and resilience. The suffocating shadow of Cesare Borgia, as we explored in the previous chapter, defined Lucrezia Borgia's darkest years, a time when her life was dictated by her brother's possessive violence and her father's corrupt ambitions. The murder of her beloved second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, and the persistent rumors of incest with Cesare and Pope Alexander VI left Lucrezia a haunted figure, her spirit battered by betrayal and loss. By 1501, at the age of 21, her marriage to Alfonso d'Este, heir to the Duchy of Ferrara, offered a lifeline, a chance to escape the toxic grip of the Borgia court and forge a new identity. Far from the scandal-soaked halls of Rome, Ferrara promised distance from her family's infamy, but it also presented new challenges. Lucrezia, shaped by years of survival in a world where trust was a trap, arrived in Ferrara with a reputation that preceded her name synonymous with poison and seduction. Yet this chapter reveals how Lucrezia, against all odds, transformed herself from a pawn in her family's schemes into a respected duchess, patron of the arts, and mother, even as the scars of her past lingered. This is the story of her redemption and resilience, a testament to her ability to carve out meaning in a life that had been hijacked from birth. Lucrezia's arrival in Ferrara in early 1502 marked a pivotal moment, a literal and metaphorical journey from the moral cesspool of Rome to a court renowned for its cultural sophistication. The marriage to Alfonso d'Este was a strategic triumph for the Borgias, aligning them with one of Italy's most prestigious families, but it came with skepticism. The d'Este family, wary of the Borgia taint, initially viewed Lucrezia with suspicion, their court buzzing with whispers of her scandalous past. The negotiations for the marriage, as we saw, showcased Lucrezia's growing acumen. She bargained for position, dowry, and guarantees with a cold efficiency that belied her youth, ensuring terms that granted her a degree of autonomy. The wedding itself was a spectacle, with Ferrara's streets adorned in splendor and Lucrezia, at 22, described as a vision of grace, her golden hair cascading beneath a jeweled veil. Yet behind her poised exterior lay a woman acutely aware of the stakes. This was her chance to redefine herself, to prove that she was more than the sum of her family's crimes. Ferrara, unlike Rome, was a haven of intellectual and artistic vitality. The d'Este court was a magnet for poets, painters, and scholars, and Lucrezia seized this opportunity to reinvent her public image. She surrounded herself with luminaries like Pietro Bembo, one of the era's greatest humanists, whose passionate correspondence with her revealed a woman of remarkable depth. Their letters, filled with discussions of poetry, love, and philosophy, painted Lucrezia not as the poisonous seductress of legend, but as a cultured mind seeking meaning in a life of imposed roles. She also patronized artists like Titian and Dosso Dossi, commissioning works that adorned Ferrara's palaces and churches, establishing herself as a tastemaker. Her court became a rival to Florence and Venice in its cultural brilliance, a testament to her vision and ability to inspire loyalty. This transformation was no mere facade. It was a deliberate act of agency, a way for Lucrezia to reclaim a narrative that had been written by others. Beyond her cultural contributions, Lucrezia proved an able administrator. During Alfonso d'Este's frequent absences, often leading military campaigns or negotiating alliances, she governed Ferrara with a competence that surprised those who knew her only by reputation. She managed the duchy's finances, oversaw its defenses, and mediated disputes among nobles, earning respect for her fairness and decisiveness. Contemporary accounts describe her as a stabilizing force, her calm demeanor and sharp intellect a counterpoint to the volatility of Renaissance politics. This role allowed Lucrezia to exercise a power she had never known in Rome, where her father and brother had controlled her every move. In Ferrara, she was no longer a pawn, but a player, her decisions shaping the lives of thousands. Yet this newfound agency came with a bittersweet awareness. Her skills had been honed in the crucible of Borgia treachery, a legacy she could never fully escape. Lucrezia's marriage to Alfonso d'Este, initially a political arrangement, evolved into a partnership of mutual respect. Unlike her previous husbands, Alfonso was a pragmatic man, more soldier than courtier, who came to value Lucrezia's intelligence and counsel. While their relationship lacked the passion of her marriage to Alfonso of Aragon, it offered stability and a shared purpose, securing the d'Este legacy. Lucrezia bore Alfonso several children, including Ercole, Ippolito, and Eleonora, each birth a step toward fulfilling her dynastic role. Yet her pregnancies, at least 11, many ending in miscarriage or stillbirth, took a devastating toll on her health. Each loss was a reminder of how her body had been commodified from childhood, first by her father's political schemes and now by the demands of dynasty. Her letters from this period reveal a woman grappling with physical frailty and emotional complexity, her resilience tempered by moments of profound vulnerability. The specter of the Borgia past continued to haunt Lucrezia, even in Ferrara. Rumors of her family's scandals, incest, murder, and the mysterious infans Romanus followed her north, whispered by courtiers and exploited by enemies. Cesare's campaigns in the Romagna, though distant, kept the Borgia name synonymous with bloodshed. His letters to Lucrezia, preserved in archives, hint at a lingering possessiveness, his tone oscillating between affection and control. These missives must have stirred mixed emotions in Lucrezia: gratitude for the brother who had once protected her, resentment for the man who had murdered her husband and shaped her infamy. Her response was to double down on her reinvention, using her role as Duchess to distance herself from the Borgia taint. She cultivated alliances with neighboring states, hosted diplomats with charm, and invested in charitable works, founding convents and hospitals that softened her public image. The death of Pope Alexander VI in 1503, as we noted, was a seismic shift in Lucrezia's world. His passing, possibly by poison, though officially attributed to fever, left her with a complex mix of relief and pragmatism. She shed no public tears, focusing instead on securing her position in Ferrara, a sign of how deeply her father's betrayal had wounded her. Cesare's downfall followed swiftly, a dramatic collapse that mirrored his meteoric rise. Without papal protection, his enemies, Orsini, Colonna, and others, closed in. Imprisoned, then escaping, Cesare fled to Spain, where he died in a minor skirmish in 1507 at the age of 31. Lucrezia's reaction was characteristically enigmatic. She wore mourning clothes longer than protocol required, a gesture that puzzled observers. Was it grief for the brother who had both tormented and shielded her, or a calculated act to honor the Borgia name for political ends? Her silence on the matter speaks volumes, a reflection of the emotional wall she had built to survive years of manipulation. Cesare's death marked the end of the Borgia era, freeing Lucrezia from the immediate threat of her family's schemes. Yet the psychological scars remained. Her correspondence from Ferrara reveals a woman of surprising depth, writing of art, faith, and governance, but rarely of her past. The silence about her youth, her father's control, her brother's violence, the loss of Alfonso suggests wounds too deep for words. Her children became her anchor, a chance to break the cycle of corruption that had defined her upbringing. By all accounts, she was a devoted mother, shielding her offspring from the political intrigues that had ensnared her. Yet she must have watched them closely, fearing the Borgia taint might surface, a legacy of ambition and ruthlessness that haunted her. Lucrezia's resilience was tested by her physical decline. The constant pregnancies, combined with the stress of her extraordinary life, eroded her health. By her late 30s, she was described as frail, her once radiant beauty softened by exhaustion. Her final pregnancy in 1519 at the age of 39 proved fatal. She gave birth to a daughter, Isabella, who survived only briefly, and Lucrezia succumbed to puerperal fever days later, on June 24, 1519. Her deathbed scene, as reported by witnesses, was striking for its serenity. She settled her affairs with characteristic efficiency, made provisions for her children, and received the last rites from priests who served a church far removed from her father's corruption. Ferrara mourned her passing, a testament to the respect she had earned as a duchess and patron. Her death marked the end of a life that had begun in scandal and ended in quiet dignity, a journey from victim to survivor. Lucrezia's time in Ferrara was a remarkable act of reinvention, a defiance of the narrative that had branded her a villain. She was not the poisonous seductress of legend, as modern historians have clarified, but a woman whose intelligence and resilience allowed her to navigate impossible circumstances. No credible evidence supports the tales of poison or incest. These were the propaganda of her enemies, amplified by a misogynistic culture that found a beautiful murderess more compelling than a brutalized child. Her legacy in Ferrara, her patronage, her governance, her motherhood stands as proof of her strength, even as the Borgia name continued to cast a shadow. As we move to the final chapter, we will reflect on Lucrezia's enduring legacy, exploring how her story challenges our understanding of power, gender, and survival. Her transformation in Ferrara, from a pawn to a figure of grace and influence, offers a lens into the complexities of the Renaissance, a time when beauty and brutality coexisted, and a woman's strength could shine through even the darkest constraints. The final act, Lucrezia Borgia's legacy in the echoes of a tragic life. The dawn of Lucrezia Borgia's life in Ferrara, as explored in the previous chapter, marked a remarkable transformation from a pawn in the Borgia family's ruthless schemes to a respected duchess and patron of the arts. Far from the scandal-ridden Vatican, Lucrezia seized the opportunity to redefine herself, cultivating a court of intellectual brilliance, governing with competence, and forging a partnership of mutual respect with her husband, Alfonso d'Este. Yet the scars of her past, the public humiliation of her first marriage's annulment, the brutal murder of her second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, and the suffocating grip of her brother Cesare remained etched into her soul. The deaths of Pope Alexander VI in 1503 and Cesare in 1507 freed her from their immediate control, but the weight of the Borgia legacy lingered, a shadow that followed her even in the cultural haven of Ferrara. This final chapter examines the closing years of Lucrezia's life, her death at 39, and the enduring legacy she left behind. A story not of poison and seduction, as legend would have it, but of a woman who found resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity, challenging the narratives that sought to define her. Lucrezia's years in Ferrara were a testament to her ability to adapt and thrive in a world that had repeatedly tried to break her. As we saw, she arrived in 1502 as a figure of suspicion, her Borgia name synonymous with scandal. Yet through her patronage of poets like Pietro Bembo and artists like Titian, she transformed Ferrara's court into a beacon of Renaissance culture. Her correspondence with Bembo, filled with reflections on love, art, and faith, revealed a woman of intellectual depth, seeking to transcend the roles forced upon her. Her governance of Ferrara during Alfonso's absences showcased her administrative skill, earning her the respect of nobles who had once whispered of her infamy. She managed the duchy's finances, mediated disputes, and strengthened its defenses, proving herself a ruler in her own right. These achievements were not mere acts of survival, but deliberate steps to reclaim her agency, to prove that she was more than the sum of her family's crimes. Motherhood became Lucrezia's anchor, a source of redemption and torment. Her children with Alfonso d'Este Ercole, Ippolito, Eleonora, and others, represented a chance to break the cycle of corruption that had defined her own childhood. By all accounts, she was a devoted mother, shielding her offspring from the political intrigues that had ensnared her. Her letters reveal a tenderness toward her children, a determination to give them the stability she had never known. Yet each pregnancy was a reminder of her commodified body, a legacy of the Borgia years when her marriages were transactions and her fertility a political tool. Of her at least 11 pregnancies, many ended in miscarriage or stillbirth, each loss chipping away at her health and echoing the grief of her past losses, particularly her son Rodrigo, from her marriage to Alfonso of Aragon. Lucrezia's fear that the Borgia taint ambition, ruthlessness, or moral decay might manifest in her children haunted her, a constant tension between her hopes for their future and the shadows of her past. The death of Alexander Sicidas in 1503, as noted, brought Lucrezia a quiet relief, a release from the father who had both elevated and imprisoned her. Cesare's downfall in 1507, dying in a minor skirmish in Spain after a meteoric rise and fall, marked the end of the Borgia era. Lucrezia's enigmatic response wearing mourning clothes longer than custom demanded hinted at the complexity of her feelings. Cesare had been her tormentor, orchestrating the murder of her beloved Alfonso and fueling rumors that tarnished her name. Yet he had also been her protector in a world where enemies abounded. Her prolonged mourning may have been a gesture of familial duty, a political calculation to maintain appearances, or a private acknowledgement of the tangled bond they shared. This ambiguity underscores the emotional toll of her life, where love and pain were inseparable, shaped by a family that turned affection into control. In Ferrara, Lucrezia's life took on a rhythm of relative stability, but the physical and emotional toll of her past was inescapable. Her health, weakened by years of difficult pregnancies and the stress of her extraordinary life, began to falter. By her mid-30s, contemporaries noted a fragility in her once radiant appearance, her golden hair still striking, but her frame worn by exhaustion. She continued to govern, patronize the arts, and nurture her children, but each pregnancy brought her closer to collapse. Her correspondence from these years reveals a woman of resilience and introspection, grappling with her mortality and the legacy she would leave. She wrote of faith, seeking solace in a church far different from the one her father had corrupted, and of her children, whom she saw as her truest achievement. Yet her silence about her youth, the betrayals, the murders, the rumors, spoke of wounds too deep to articulate, a past she could neither escape nor fully reconcile. Lucrezia's final pregnancy in 1519, at the age of 39, proved her undoing. The birth of her daughter Isabella was fraught with complications, and the child survived only briefly. Lucrezia, already weakened, succumbed to puerperal fever on June 24, 1519. Her deathbed scene, as recorded by witnesses, was a study in serenity, a stark contrast to the tumult of her life. She settled her affairs with the efficiency that had defined her rule, making provisions for her children and receiving the last rites with a calm acceptance that surprised those around her. Ferrara mourned her deeply, a testament to the respect she had earned as a duchess who transformed their city into a cultural jewel. Her funeral, attended by nobles, clergy, and commoners, marked the end of a life that had begun in scandal and ended in dignity, a journey from victim to survivor. Lucrezia's death did not silence the myths that surrounded her. For centuries she was painted as a femme fatale, a poisoner whose beauty masked a malevolent heart. The image of Lucrezia with a hollow ring dispensing the infamous cantarella poison became a staple of popular lore, amplified by Renaissance enemies and later romantics who found a murderous seductress more compelling than a brutalized child. Modern historians, however, have dismantled these myths, finding no credible evidence of her involvement in poisoning or other crimes. The accusations of incest, while impossible to prove or disprove definitively, reflect the propaganda of families like the Sforza and Orsini, who sought to undermine the Borgias. The true Lucrezia was a victim of her family's ambitions, her life shaped by forces beyond her control, her father's greed, her brother's obsession, and a society that commodified women as political tools. Her legacy, though obscured by scandal, is one of extraordinary resilience. Lucrezia's ability to transform herself in Ferrara from a tainted Borgia to a respected duchess speaks to a strength that history has often overlooked. She was not the villain of legend, but a woman who navigated a world of predators, finding ways to exercise agency within overwhelming constraints. Her patronage of the arts, her governance, and her devotion to her children were acts of defiance, proof that she could create beauty and meaning despite a life of imposed roles. Her story challenges the narratives that reduce women to stereotypes, whether victims or villains, and forces us to confront the complexities of survival in a corrupt system. Lucrezia's life also illuminates the darker truths of the Renaissance, an era celebrated for its artistic and intellectual achievements, but riddled with moral decay. The same culture that produced Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci also birthed the Borgia papacy, a paradox of brilliance and brutality. Lucrezia stood at this intersection, her life a testament to how individuals can be both products and victims of their time. Her story resonates with modern struggles issues of power, gender, and the exploitation of the vulnerable. The mechanisms of control she endured, isolation, gaslighting, the destruction of support networks, remain depressingly familiar, as do the ways victims are blamed for their suffering. Lucrezia's survival strategies, recast by history as evidence of evil, mirror the resilience of countless women who have navigated oppressive systems. The final irony of Lucrezia's legacy is that she is remembered more for crimes she didn't commit than for the horrors she endured. The salacious tales of poison and incest overshadowed the documented reality of a child robbed of agency, a young woman forced to witness the murder of those she loved, and a mother who died worn out by a life that was never fully her own. Her story asks us to reconsider how history's written, how misogyny and sensationalism distort truth, turning victims into villains. It challenges us to honor the suffering of those like Lucrezia, whose voices were silenced by the powerful, and to recognize the strength it takes to retain humanity in inhuman circumstances. As we close Lucrezia's story, we are left with questions that echo across centuries. How do we judge those caught in corrupt systems, both victims and participants? How do we separate truth from propaganda? How do we honor the resilience of those who survived by navigating impossible odds? Lucrezia Borgia, born into a world that sought to define her, leaves us a legacy not of scandal but of endurance. She was a woman who, despite being raised for corruption and forced into complicity, found ways to create islands of beauty and meaning in an ocean of betrayal. Her life, a mirror reflecting our own struggles with power and survival, reminds us that the greatest tragedies are not in the myths we weave, but in the human cost of systems that destroy while claiming to protect. The unseen Lucrezia, reflecting on power, gender, and survival in her enduring legacy. Lucrezia Borgia's final years in Ferrara, as explored in the previous chapter, marked a remarkable act of reinvention, transforming her from a pawn in the Borgia family's ruthless schemes into a respected duchess, patron of the arts, and devoted mother. Freed from the immediate control of her father, Pope Alexander VI, and her brother Cesare, whose deaths in 1503 and 1507 signaled the collapse of the Borgia dynasty, Lucrezia carved out a space of dignity and influence in a court that initially viewed her with suspicion. Her patronage of poets like Pietro Bembo, her governance of Ferrara, and her fierce love for her children revealed a woman of resilience and depth, defying the scandalous myths that painted her as a poisoner and seductress. Yet her death in 1519 at the age of 39, worn down by a life of relentless pregnancies and the enduring scars of her past, was not the end of her story. The myths that surrounded her, fueled by enemies and romanticized by history, continued to obscure the truth of a woman whose humanity was systematically denied. This final chapter reflects on Lucrezia's legacy, exploring how her life illuminates broader truths about power, gender, and survival, and how the distortion of her story challenges us to rethink the narratives we inherit. It is a call to see the unseen Lucretia, a woman whose strength and suffering resonate across centuries. Lucretia's death in Ferrara, following the tragic loss of her newborn daughter Isabella, was a quiet yet poignant conclusion to a life marked by tumult. As we saw, her final moments were serene, a stark contrast to the chaos of her youth. She settled her affairs with the efficiency that had defined her rule, ensuring her children's future and receiving the last rites with a calm acceptance that surprised those who knew her story. Ferrara mourned her as a duchess who had transformed their city into a cultural beacon, her court a haven for artists and scholars. Yet beyond the city's walls, the myths of Lucrezia Borgia persisted, casting her as a femme fatale whose beauty concealed a venomous heart. The image of her wielding a hollow ring filled with the infamous cantarella poison became a staple of Renaissance gossip, amplified by enemies like the Sforza and Orsini families, and later immortalized in operas and novels. These tales, as modern historians have shown, were largely fabrications, rooted in misogyny and the political vendettas of a turbulent era. The real Lucrezia was not a villain, but a victim, her life a testament to the cost of unchecked power and the commodification of women. The distortion of Lucrezia's story began in her lifetime, fueled by the Borgia family's notorious reputation. Her father, Alexander VI, had turned the papacy into a tool for personal gain, bribing his way to the throne of St. Peter and orchestrating marriages and murders to secure his dynasty. Her brother Cesare, with his charisma and brutality, had carved a bloody path through Italy, his possessive hold over Lucrezia, sparking rumors of incest that shocked even a jaded Rome. These accusations, as we noted, were likely exaggerated by enemies seeking to discredit the Borgias, but they took root in a society where the family's documented crimes, bribery, assassination, and debauchery made the unthinkable plausible. Lucrezia, as the most visible female figure in the Borgia saga, became an easy target, her beauty and intelligence twisted into evidence of malice. The annulment of her first marriage to Giovanni Sforza, with his humiliating public examination, and the murder of her second husband, Alfonso of Aragon, by Cesare's hand, only fueled the narrative of her as a willing participant in her family's sins. Modern scholarship has dismantled these myths, revealing Lucrezia as a woman caught in a web of others' making. No credible evidence supports the tales of poison or incest. The Cantarella myth, for instance, is now understood as a literary embellishment, with no contemporary records confirming its use by Lucrezia. The accusations of incest, while impossible to disprove entirely, reflect the propaganda of a time when women in power were often vilified as unnatural. Lucrezia's true crime, if it can be called that, was surviving in a world that sought to exploit her. From childhood, she was groomed as a political tool, her marriages first to Sforza, then to Alfonso of Aragon, and finally to Alfonso d'Este transactions designed to serve her father's ambitions. Her body, her name, and her future were never her own. Yet she managed to navigate these constraints with a resilience that speaks to her inner strength. Her transformation in Ferrara, from a tainted Borgia to a respected duchess, was a deliberate act of defiance, a refusal to be defined by the sins of her family. Lucrezia's story is a lens through which to view the darker truths of the Renaissance, an era celebrated for its artistic and intellectual triumphs, but riddled with moral decay. The same culture that produced Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel and Leonardo da Vinci's masterpieces also birthed the Borgia papacy, a paradox of brilliance and barbarity. Lucrezia stood at this crossroads, her life embodying the contradictions of her time. The Vatican, meant to be a beacon of spiritual guidance, was a marketplace of vice, where cardinals kept mistresses, sold sacred offices, and plotted murders with impunity. The banquet of chestnuts, where courtesans entertained the Pope and his entourage, was not an anomaly but a symptom of a church corrupted by power. Lucrezia, raised in this environment, was shaped by its values or lack thereof, yet managed to carve out spaces of humanity, her patronage of the arts and devotion to her children, a counterpoint to the brutality of her youth. Her story also illuminates the systemic commodification of women in the Renaissance, a time when their value was measured in terms of alliances and heirs. Lucrezia's marriages, each a political maneuver, reflect a broader pattern in which women were traded like currency, their agency curtailed by the demands of dynasty. Her first marriage to Sforza ended in public humiliation. Her second, to Alfonso of Aragon, ended in murder. Her third, to Alfonso d'Este, offered a chance at autonomy, but came with the physical toll of constant pregnancies. Her 11 documented pregnancies, many ending in loss, underscore how her body was a battleground, her fertility a tool for others' ambitions. Yet Lucrezia's ability to govern Ferrara, to foster a cultural renaissance, and to nurture her children reveals a strength that transcended these constraints. She was not merely a victim, but a survivor, finding ways to exercise power within a system designed to deny it to her. Lucrezia's legacy challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about how history is written and remembered. For centuries, the sensational tales of her villainy overshadowed the documented reality of her suffering. The image of a beautiful poisoner was more marketable than that of a traumatized child who grew into a competent ruler, a distortion rooted in misogyny and the allure of scandal. This inversion of victim and villain is a final injustice, a reminder of how narratives are shaped by those in power. The men who orchestrated her suffering, her father, her brother, the political enemies who spread lies, are often portrayed as ambitious or colorful, while Lucrezia was branded as evil. This double standard reflects a broader pattern in which women's survival strategies are recast as proof of malice, their resilience overlooked in favor of stereotypes. Her story resonates with modern issues, particularly the dynamics of power and abuse. The mechanisms of control Lucrezia endured, isolation, manipulation, the destruction of support networks, mirror those faced by victims of systemic oppression today. The way she was blamed for her family's crimes, her beauty and intelligence twisted in evidence of guilt, echoes the victim blaming that persists in cases of abuse. Her ability to find agency within these constraints through governance, patronage, and motherhood offers a template for understanding how the oppressed can navigate impossible circumstances. Lucrezia's life asks us to consider how we treat the vulnerable, how we wield power, and how we remember those who survive by whatever means necessary. The tragedy of Lucrezia Borgia is not in the myths of poison or seduction, but in the reality of a life hijacked from birth. Born in 1480 as the illegitimate daughter of a man who would become the most corrupt pope in history, she was denied the basic right of self-determination. Her childhood was a lesson in survival, her youth a series of betrayals, and her adulthood a battle to reclaim her humanity. That she emerged as a capable ruler and patron of the arts speaks to a strength that defies the constraints of her era. Her story is not unique in its pattern. Countless women throughout history have been used as political pawns, their suffering erased by narratives that favor the powerful. What sets Lucretia apart is the documentation of her life, the records that allow us to glimpse the woman behind the myth. In reflecting on Lucretia's legacy, we are left with questions that have no easy answers. How do we judge those who are both victims and participants in corrupt systems? How do we separate the person from the propaganda? How do we honor the resilience of those who survive against overwhelming odds? Lucrezia Borgia stands as a mirror, reflecting our struggles with power, gender, and survival. She was not the villain history branded her, but a human being whose humanity was systematically denied, forced to navigate a world that sought to exploit her. Her life, a tapestry of beauty and tragedy, reminds us that the greatest horrors are not in the stories we tell, but in the ways we destroy each other while claiming to act in the name of love, family, or God. In death, as in life, Lucretia remains trapped in narratives written by others, her true self an enigma, but her enduring legacy is a call to see the unseen, to recognize the strength it takes to remain human in inhuman circumstances. Epilogue: The eternal enigma of Lucrezia Borgia, a call to reclaim her truth. The life of Lucrezia Borgia, as we reflected in the previous chapter, was a tapestry woven with threads of resilience, tragedy, and reinvention. Her transformation in Ferrara from a scandal-tainted Borgia to a respected duchess, patron of the arts, and devoted mother stood as a testament to her strength, defying the myths that branded her a poisoner and seductress. The deaths of her father, Pope Alexander VI, in 1503 and her brother Cesare in 1507 freed her from their suffocating grip, allowing her to forge a new identity far from the corrupt Vatican. Yet her death in 1519 at the age of 39, worn down by relentless pregnancies and the enduring scars of her past, did not mark the end of her story. For centuries, Lucretia remained trapped in narratives spun by enemies and romantics, her humanity obscured by tales of poison and incest. This epilogue delves into the enduring enigma of Lucrezia Borgia, exploring how her story continues to challenge our understanding of history, gender, and power, and serves as a call to reclaim her truth from the distortions that have defined her legacy. Lucrezia's death in Ferrara, as we saw, was met with genuine mourning, a stark contrast to the scandal that had shadowed her life. Her serene passing, surrounded by those who respected her as a ruler and patron, marked the end of a journey from victim to survivor. Yet the world beyond Ferrara refused to let her rest. The myths that had begun in her lifetime, fueled by the Borgia's enemies and amplified by a society eager for salacious tales, grew into a legend that overshadowed the truth. By the 19th century, Lucrezia had become a cultural archetype, immortalized in Victor Hugo's play Lucrezia Borgia and Gaetano Donizetti's opera of the same name as a venomous femme fatale, her beauty a lure for destruction. These portrayals, while dramatic, bore little resemblance to the documented reality of a woman whose life was shaped by forces beyond her control. The question remains, why did these myths endure? And what do they reveal about the society that crafted them? The persistence of Lucretia's villainous image is rooted in the dynamics of power and gender in the Renaissance and beyond. As the daughter of a corrupt pope and sister to a ruthless conqueror, Lucrezia was an easy scapegoat for a society uncomfortable with women in proximity to power. Her beauty, intelligence, and visibility made her a target for misogynistic tropes that equated female influence with deceit and danger. The accusations of incest, though unproven, were particularly insidious, tapping into cultural anxieties about family, sexuality, and authority. These rumors, as we noted, were likely propaganda spread by enemies like the Sforza and Orsini families, who sought to undermine the Borgias' legitimacy. Yet they found fertile ground in a Rome where the family's actual crimes, bribery, murder, and the debauched banquet of chestnuts lent credibility to even the most outlandish claims. Lucrezia, as a woman, bore the brunt of this vilification, her agency erased to fit a narrative that cast her as either a willing accomplice or a passive victim. Modern historians have worked to unravel these distortions, piecing together a portrait of Lucrezia that aligns with the evidence. As we explored, there is no credible record of her poisoning anyone. The Cantarella myth, so central to her legend, is now understood as a literary invention, with no contemporary accounts linking it to her. The incest allegations, while impossible to disprove entirely, lack substantive proof and reflect the political mudslinging of the time. What emerges instead is a story of a woman systematically exploited from childhood, her life dictated by her father's ambition and her brother's possessiveness. Her marriages to Giovanni Sforza, Alfonso of Aragon, and Alfonso d'Este were political transactions, each one stripping her of autonomy. The annulment of her first marriage with its degrading public examination and the murder of her second husband by Cesare's hand were not her doing but traumas she endured. Her reinvention in Ferrara, where she governed with skill and fostered a cultural renaissance, was a remarkable act of agency, proof of her ability to transcend the constraints of her upbringing. Lucrezia's story is not just a personal tragedy, but a window into the systemic forces that shaped the Renaissance. The era, celebrated for its artistic and intellectual achievements, was also a time of profound moral decay, where power corrupted absolutely. The Vatican, under Alexander VI, became a marketplace of vice, its sacred mission undermined by orgies, simony, and assassination. Lucrezia, raised in this environment, was both a product and a victim of its values. Her life reflects the commodification of women, a common practice in a society where noble women were traded for alliances and heirs. Her 11 pregnancies, many ending in loss, underscore how her body was a tool for dynasty, a continuation of the exploitation that began in childhood. Yet her ability to govern Ferrara, to patronize artists like Titian, and to nurture her children reveals a strength that defied these constraints, a resilience that challenges the simplistic narratives of victimhood or villainy. The distortion of Lucrezia's legacy also raises broader questions about how history is constructed. For centuries, the salacious myths were more compelling than the documented truth, a reflection of how misogyny and sensationalism shape historical memory. The men who orchestrated her suffering, her father, her brother, the enemies who slandered her, are often portrayed as ambitious or colorful, their crimes softened by time. Lucrezia, by contrast, was branded as evil, her beauty and intelligence twisted into proof of malice. This double standard mirrors a pattern in which women's survival strategies are recast as evidence of guilt, their resilience overlooked in favor of stereotypes. The rehabilitation of Lucrezia's reputation in recent decades, driven by historians like Sarah Bradford and Maria Bianchi, is a corrective to this injustice. But it cannot erase the centuries of misrepresentation. Her story asks us to interrogate the narratives we inherit, to question who writes history and whose voices are silenced. Lucretia's life resonates with modern issues, particularly the dynamics of power, abuse, and survival. The mechanisms of control she endured, isolation, manipulation, the destruction of support networks are eerily familiar, echoing the experiences of those trapped in abusive systems today. The way she was blamed for her family's crimes, her agency erased by narratives that cast her as a seductress, parallels the victim blaming that persists in cases of exploitation. Her ability to find agency within these constraints through governance, patronage, and motherhood offers a model for understanding how the oppressed can navigate impossible circumstances. Lucrezia's story is a reminder that survival is not passive, but an active, often painful act of defiance, a refusal to be defined by the forces that seek to destroy. Her legacy also challenges us to consider the countless women whose stories remain untold. Lucrezia's life is unique in its documentation, preserved in letters, chronicles, and papal records that allow us to glimpse the woman behind the myth. Yet as we noted, the pattern of her suffering, used as a political pawn, denied autonomy, blame for the crimes of men was commonplace in the Renaissance and beyond. Countless others endured similar fates in obscurity, their names lost to history, their voices silenced by the powerful. Lucrezia's story, in this sense, is a proxy for theirs, a call to recognize the resilience of those who survived against overwhelming odds. It asks us to honor their suffering, to see their strength, and to question the systems that perpetuate such injustices. In reclaiming Lucrezia's truth, we confront the eternal enigma of her inner life. What did she think in the quiet moments between public performances? What dreams died with each forced marriage, each murdered loved one, each pregnancy that ended in loss? Her letters, while revealing her intellect and depth, are guarded about her past, a silence that speaks of wounds too deep for words. Her serene deathbed, her focus on her children's future, suggests a woman who found peace in the end. But the cost of that peace was a life of relentless struggle. We will never know the full truth of Lucrezia Borgia, the private thoughts, the unspoken fears, the hopes she carried to her grave. Yet this mystery is part of her power, an invitation to see her not as a myth, but as a human being, complex and contradictory, shaped by a world that sought to define her. Lucrezia Borgia's story is a call to action, urging us to rethink how we treat the vulnerable, how we wield power, and how we remember those who survive by whatever means necessary. She was raised for corruption, groomed for exploitation, and forced into complicity with her own abuse. Yet she retained a humanity that history has often denied her. Her transformation from victim to survivor, from pawn to player, is a testament to the strength it takes to endure the unendurable. 5 centuries after her death, Lucrezia remains a mirror, reflecting our struggles with power, gender, and truth. Her legacy is not in the scandals that defined her, but in the quiet courage of a woman who, despite everything, found ways to create beauty and meaning in a world of betrayal. In honoring her, we honor all those whose stories have been erased, whose resilience shines through the cracks of history, and whose truth demands to be reclaimed. Thank you all for taking the time to watch the gripping and tragic story of Lucrezia Borgia. If you found this video engaging and informative, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more high-quality content. Your support motivates us to create even more insightful and captivating videos in the future. Let's dive deeper into history's mysteries together. Thank you, and see you next time.